The preacher called it a union. The townsfolk of Laramie called it a disgrace. Liam Callahan, the man with more cattle than all of them combined, called it a transaction. And Josephine Miller, standing in a borrowed dress at the altar, her hands trembling, called it survival. Her new husband didn't look at her. He stared past the cross, his jaw set like granite. This wasn't a marriage. It was an execution of a contract signed with her father's life and sealed with her own. She was now the wife of the most powerful and most broken man in the Montana Territory, and the shame was a physical weight heavier than the gold band he'd forced onto her finger. The dust in the Miller homestead never settled. It clung to the sparse furniture, coated the tin cups, and settled in the lines of Samuel Miller's face as he coughed a dry, racking sound that scraped Josephine's nerves raw. The drought of 1888 had taken their crops, the harsh winter had taken their 2 milk cows, and now Walter Corbett was coming to take the rest. Corbett wasn't a rancher. He was a vulture in a tailored suit. He'd bought up her father's debt from the bank and arrived that morning, his buggy gleaming. "Josephine, my dear," he'd said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "A terrible shame. Your father's note is due. I'm afraid I'll have to foreclose." "We just need more time," Josephine pleaded, her voice quiet but firm. She was educated, having attended a ladies' college back east before her mother died, and she hated the desperation in her own tone. "Time is the one thing you've run out of," Corbett said, tipping his hat. "Unless perhaps another arrangement could be made. A bright young woman like you." Josephine's stomach turned. She knew exactly what he implied. Before she could voice her disgust, the sound of a heavy horse interrupted them. Liam Callahan didn't dismount like other men. He seemed to simply appear a tall, broad shadow, detaching itself from his massive black stallion. He was a legend in the territory, a man who had carved the sprawling Cross Sea Ranch from nothing but wilderness and grief. His first wife Anna had died 5 years prior, and the man's heart, they said, had been buried with her. He ignored Corbett, his piercing blue eyes landing on Samuel, who was struggling to stand. "Miller." Callahan Samuel rasped, nodding. "I hear you're in trouble." Liam's voice was like gravel. Corbett stepped forward, puffing his chest. "This is a private matter, Callahan. The note is mine." Liam turned his head slowly. The man radiated a cold power that made Corbett visibly shrink. "Is it I bought every outstanding note in this county yesterday, including this one?" He pulled a sheaf of papers from his saddlebag and tossed it at Corbett's feet. "Your business here is done." Corbett, his face purple with rage, snatched the papers and stormed off, but not before casting a venomous look at Josephine. A heavy silence fell. Josephine, still trembling from the confrontation, finally found her voice. "Mr. Callahan, we have no way to repay you." Liam Callahan finally looked at her. Really looked at her. He saw the worn-out calico dress, the intelligence in her exhausted eyes, and the pride that held her spine straight. "I'm not a banker, Miss Miller. I don't deal in interest." "Then, what do you want?" Samuel asked, leaning on the doorframe. Liam's gaze was blunt, stripping her bare. "I need a wife. My ranch needs a mistress. The house is empty." He said the word empty as if it tasted like ash. "I will tear up your father's note. I will have my private doctor, Dr. Elias Thorne, sent from Cheyenne to look after him. I will ensure he has a line of credit at the general store for the rest of his days." Josephine felt the blood drain from her face. In exchange, Liam confirmed, his voice devoid of emotion, "You will take my name. You will run my house. You will be Mrs. Callahan. It is a simple, binding transaction." She looked at her father, who was watching her with a look of utter despair. This was her fault. She was the one who had encouraged him to take the loan for that failed irrigation system. This was her debt to pay. Mr. Callahan, Josephine, said, her voice shaking but clear. Does this transaction include your loyalty, your respect? A muscle in Liam's jaw twitched. It includes my name and my protection. The rest is not part of the bargain. He was offering her a cage, but it was a cage that would save her father. She looked at the dusty floor, the empty cupboards, and her father's grey-skinned face. She had no choice. I accept. The wedding was 2 days later. It was a cold, 5-minute affair at the territorial courthouse. Josephine wore a dress borrowed from the preacher's wife, a size too large. Liam wore his usual ranch clothes, barely cleaned. The only attendees were the preacher, his wife, and Liam's loyal foreman, a quiet man named Ben. As they walked out onto the wooden sidewalk, the whispers of the few townsfolk present were like bee stings. Bought her he did. Shameful. That poor girl marrying that cold-hearted brute. Liam heard them. He didn't flinch. He simply grabbed Josephine's arm, his grip like a steel trap, and guided her to the wagon. The ride to the Cross Sea was 3 hours long and utterly silent. Josephine sat stiffly, watching the rolling plains turn into jagged hills. The land was beautiful, but desolate, matching the man beside her. When they arrived, the ranch house was larger than any she'd ever seen. It was a 2-story log and stone fortress, built to withstand the harshest winter and the loneliest heart. But as she stepped inside, a chill that had nothing to do with the air hit her. The house was dark, the furniture covered in dust cloths. Mavis Liam bellowed. A woman emerged from the shadows. She was tall and thin, dressed in severe black, with greying hair, pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to pull her face into a permanent scowl. "This is Mavis Greer," Liam said, not looking at either of them. "She's the housekeeper. She was my first wife's. She was Anna's aunt." Mavis Greer looked at Josephine, her eyes travelling from her worn-out boots to her pale, frightened face. The look Mavis gave her wasn't just dislike. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. "She'll be staying in the East Wing," Liam said to Mavis. The East Wing. Josephine realized with a cold lurch that he meant she would be sleeping alone. This wasn't just a marriage of convenience. It was a marriage of ghosts. "Supper is at 7, Mavis said, her voice a low hiss. "The master keeps his office. You are not to disturb him. And you are not to touch any of Anna's things. They are in the West Wing. That door is to remain locked." Liam had already turned and was walking toward his office, his boots echoing on the wooden floors. He didn't look back. "Welcome to the Cross Sea, Mrs. Callahan." Mavis sneered the name, an insult. Josephine stood alone in the cavernous cold entryway, the full weight of her shameful marriage settling upon her. She had saved her father, but she had just buried herself alive. The East Wing was a series of rooms clean but sterile. They were guest rooms clearly, and held none of the warmth of a home. They were a statement: "You are a visitor here, Mrs. Callahan. You do not belong." The first week was a study in isolation. Liam Callahan was a phantom. He rose before dawn, his heavy boots the only sign he'd been in the house, and he returned long after dark, eating the supper Mavis left for him on the stove cold. He spoke to Josephine only in passing, with curt nods or single-word answers. Yes. No. The wagon's in town. Her days were defined by Mavis Greer. The housekeeper watched Josephine with the hawkish intensity of a predator. Every attempt Josephine made to contribute was silently, efficiently thwarted. On the third day, Josephine noticed the thick layer of dust on the grand piano in the parlor. She found a cloth and began to gently clean the keys. "Don't touch that!" Josephine jumped. Mavis was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed. "It was dusty," Josephine said, her voice small. "It was Anna's," Mavis snapped. "She played. You do not. I was only trying to help. Your help is not required. Your presence is tolerated because the master commands it. Nothing more. Do not delude yourself into thinking you are the mistress of this house. You are a placeholder, a warm body filling a cold contract." The cruelty was so direct, so sharp, it stole Josephine's breath. She retreated, the shame burning hot on her cheeks. Liam, it seemed, had given Mavis free rein. The housekeeper ran the ranch house like a tyrant, and the few ranch hands Josephine encountered followed her lead, treating Josephine with a mixture of pity and indifference. They saw her as her husband did a piece of property. Desperate for something to do, for some way to anchor herself, Josephine remembered the one thing Liam had said to her. "It includes my protection." She felt anything but protected. But she also remembered the other part of their ride. He had been dismissive, but he hadn't forbidden her. She found the office. Unlike the rest of the house, it was alive. A fire burned in the hearth. The desk was cluttered with maps, tally books, and letters. It smelled of leather tobacco and the man himself. He was there bent over a map, a single lamp casting his face in harsh shadows. He looked up when she entered. His eyes narrowed. "What is it?" "Mr. Callahan, I cannot be idle. I am educated. I can read, I can write. I am proficient with figures. If I am to be your wife, I cannot just sit." Liam stared at her for a long moment. She expected him to refuse to tell her to go back to her empty rooms. Instead, he grunted and gestured to a tall, looming cabinet in the corner. "The ledgers," he said. "The household accounts are a mess. Mavis deals in cash and scribbles. I've no time for it. See to it." It was a dismissal. It was a chore. But to Josephine, it was a lifeline. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he muttered, turning back to his map. "Just be accurate." She took the heavy books back to her room. For the first time in days, she had a purpose. She lit a lamp, opened the first ledger, and began to read. The first few nights it was exactly what he'd said, a mess. Mavis Greer's handwriting was sloppy, her math worse. But she was consistent. She bought flour, salt, pork beans, coffee, and vast amounts of lye soap and vinegar. But as Josephine worked, translating the chaotic scribbles into clean columns, a pattern began to emerge. It was small at first, a niggle of doubt. A receipt from the Laramie General Store for 50 pounds of flour seemed right, until Josephine found the tally from the Cross Sea Chuckwagon cook, noting only 40 pounds had been delivered. She cross-referenced. A bill for 3 new axes. The blacksmith's inventory listed them as delivered. The ranch inventory signed by Ben the foreman listed them as needed. They had been paid for, but had never arrived. It was small scale. A few dollars here, a few there. But it was consistent. She spent a week buried in the numbers. She found discrepancies in feed orders invoices for premium oats. But the stable hands complained of cheap, dusty feed. She found orders for barbed wire enough to fence the entire north pasture twice over, but the hands were still patching the old wire with scraps. Someone was skimming. Someone was stealing from Liam Callahan, right under his nose. Her first instinct was Mavis. The hatred the woman had for her was potent. Perhaps it extended to her employer. But the numbers didn't quite add up. The discrepancies were too large for simple household skimming. This was systematic. This was organized. She needed to tell Liam. She found him in the breaking pen, a fenced-in circle of mud and sweat. He was in the center, working a young, terrified colt on a long line. He moved with a quiet, powerful grace that she hadn't seen in the house. He was gentle with the animal, his voice low and firm, a stark contrast to the cold brute she knew. She waited by the fence, her hands gripping the top rail the ledger clutched to her chest. He worked for nearly an hour, ignoring her completely. Finally, he finished patting the colt's slick neck before turning to the water barrel. He drank directly from the dipper, the water tracing paths through the grime on his face. "Mr. Callahan," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I'm busy. It's important. It's about the ledgers." He sighed, tossing the dipper back. "Did you run out of ink? Go to Mavis." "Mavis is part of the problem," Josephine said, stepping through the gate. "Mr. Callahan, someone is stealing from you. A lot. I've found discrepancies in the feed, the tools, the wire. The amounts you're paying for are not the amounts the ranch is receiving." He stopped his back to her. She thought for a moment she had broken through. He turned slowly. His face was not angry. It was worse. It was laced with a deep, profound, insulting pity. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, and the formal address was a slap. "You are a city girl. You know books. You do not know ranching. We lose stock. We lose feed to rot and rats. Wire rusts. Tools break. It's the cost of doing business in the territory. This isn't rot, Mr. Callahan. This is theft. The invoices from town are precise. The deliveries to the ranch are short. Someone is pocketing the difference." He took a step toward her, his sighs blotting out the sun. "And who do you accuse, Ben, a man who's ridden with me for 15 years? The cook, the hands." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You've been here a week. Don't play rancher's wife. You're not one." "I am your wife," she shot back, stung. "And I am telling you that you are being robbed. Go back to the house, Josephine," he said, his voice dropping to that cold, dangerous level. "Stick to your numbers. Add your columns. But do not ever come to me with wild stories and accuse my men. I trust my men. I don't trust circumstance." He meant he didn't trust her, the woman he'd been forced to marry. He turned his back on her and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the center of the muddy pen. The shame was back, but this time it was mixed with something new, a cold, burning anger. He had dismissed her. He had called her a city girl. He had humiliated her. Fine. If he wouldn't believe her, she would find proof he couldn't ignore. She wasn't just a placeholder. She wasn't just a circumstance. She was Josephine Callahan, and she would uncover the truth, even if it destroyed the fragile, frozen world he had built around himself. Josephine's anger was a shield. She retreated to the ledgers, but not as a bookkeeper. She was now a hunter. Liam's dismissal had been a mistake. He hadn't just insulted her. He had underestimated her. And Josephine Miller had been underestimated her entire life. She knew she couldn't trust Mavis. The woman's hostility was too personal. But was Mavis the thief or just a bitter accomplice? The scale of the theft felt bigger than a housekeeper. It required wagons, forged invoices, and knowledge of the ranch's operations. She started a new ledger, a secret one hidden beneath the loose floorboard under her bed. In it, she noted every discrepancy. June 10th invoice for 200 lbs of coffee. Chuck wagon roster 150 lbs. Missing 50 lbs. June 12th bill of lading for 40 rolls of barbed wire. Ben's patrol report, mending north fence ran out of wire. Missing at least 20 rolls. June 14th, vet bill for 50 vials of blackleg vaccine. Stable hands log 25 vials used. Missing 25 vials. The pattern was undeniable. The thief wasn't just taking supplies. They were taking the most valuable, easily transportable goods. The missing items were a shopping list for starting a new small ranch. She needed to know who was handling the deliveries. She approached Ben, the foreman. He was a quiet, weathered man in his 50s, with eyes that had seen too much. He treated her with a cautious, distant respect. She found him by the corral mending a bridle. "Mr. Johnson," she started. "Ben's fine, ma'am." He didn't look up from his work. "Ben? Who drives the main supply wagon to Laramie?" He squinted, finally looking at her. "Mostly Pete. Pete Duggan. Why, I'm reconciling the household accounts. His receipts are untidy," Ben grunted. "Pete's untidy, but he's quick. Gets the run done in 2 days, not 3. He went back to his leather work. Pete Duggan. She'd seen him. A young, cocky hand with a quick smile that never reached his eyes. Josephine's next move was risky. She needed to know Pete's schedule. She began to help Mavis in the kitchen, enduring the woman's barbed silence and muttered insults just to be near the center of the house. She swept floors, scrubbed pots, and listened. She was rewarded 3 days later. "That good-for-nothing Pete is heading to town tomorrow." Mavis griped to the empty kitchen, scrubbing a pan with ferocious energy. "Means I'll have to deal with his muddy boots, tracking up my floor when he gets back. Tomorrow." That night, Josephine couldn't sleep. She was terrified. This was no longer about numbers. This was about real men, real theft. But the image of Liam's pitying, dismissive face spurred her on. Before dawn, she dressed not in her usual calico, but in a split skirt and a man's shirt she'd found in an abandoned closet in her wing. She went to the stables, her heart pounding. The hands were all in the bunkhouse, or at breakfast. She saddled a quiet mare, one she'd seen the hands use for gentle work. She was a decent rider, having grown up on a homestead, but her hands shook as she tightened the cinch. She rode out not toward the main road, but cutting across the pasture, keeping to the low ridges and clusters of pine. She found a high point, a rocky outcrop that overlooked the main wagon trail to Laramie, and she waited. An hour after sunrise, she saw it. The cross-sea supply wagon with Pete Duggan at the reins, whistling as he drove. She followed at a distance a mile back, letting the dust settle. It was a long, hot, tedious ride. Pete drove the wagon hard. He didn't stop at the territorial boundary. He didn't stop at the river crossing. He drove straight into Laramie. Josephine felt a sinking disappointment. Had she been wrong? Was he just an untidy teamster, after all? She tied her mare in a grove of cottonwoods outside of town and walked in, pulling her hat low. She watched from the alley across from the general store. Pete loaded the supplies Liam had ordered: flour, beans, tools. But then he did something odd. He talked animatedly with the store clerk, a man named Henderson, and handed him back several items: the axes, the vaccine, 2 rolls of wire. Henderson nodded, ticked something off a list, and then Pete drove the wagon, not to the feed store but to the back of the general store. He and Henderson loaded different items: sacks of cheap, dusty-looking feed, sacks that were smaller but more numerous. Josephine's blood ran cold. The invoices were real. Pete would show Liam a real invoice for premium oats, but he was returning the premium oats and buying cheap feed, pocketing the difference. But that still didn't account for the scale of the theft. This was clever, but it was small money. The missing wire, the tools, the vaccine. Pete finished loading and drove the wagon to the edge of town, parking it near the livery. He walked not to the saloon, but to the land office. Josephine followed. She slipped in behind him, pretending to look at the large territorial maps on the wall. She watched Pete walk up to the main desk, and standing there laughing with the clerk was Walter Corbett. Corbett clapped Pete on the back. "Good man, Duggan. Got the supplies." "Every last bit, Mr. Corbett. They'll be at the usual drop point tonight. The special order, too." "Excellent. Callahan's a fool. His new city-bred wife has him domesticated," Corbett said with a sneer. The clerk laughed. "Here's the new deed filing, Mr. Corbett. That last parcel you bought closes the circle. You've got him. His north pasture is cut off from the river. He'll have to sell or drive his cattle 20 miles south. You'll be able to buy him out for pennies by snowfall." Josephine froze, her hand flying to her mouth. This wasn't about skimming. This was a war. Corbett wasn't just stealing supplies. He was strategically buying the small homesteads around the Cross Sea, using the land office records to find parcels Liam hadn't noticed. And Pete Duggan was his spy, his agent, paid with the money he skimmed from the supply runs. The missing wire, the vaccines. Pete wasn't just pocketing the difference. He was delivering those premium supplies directly to Corbett, helping him build the rival ranch that was slowly strangling the Cross Sea. Josephine backed out of the office, her mind reeling. She had been right. She had been so spectacularly right. And Liam was walking into a trap that would cost him everything. She raced back to her horse, her mind flying. Pete would be at the usual drop point tonight. She had to intercept him, but she couldn't. He would be back at the ranch tomorrow. She needed more than just her word. She needed ironclad proof. She rode back to the Cross Sea, a different woman than the one who had left. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. She had to find the special order. When Pete returned the next afternoon, she was watching from her window. He put the wagon away and went to the bunkhouse. Josephine waited an hour until the dinner bell rang, calling all the hands, including Pete, to the cookhouse. This was her chance. She slipped out of the house and ran to the supply barn. She prayed it wasn't locked. The door swung open with a creak. Inside, the wagon was unloaded. The sacks of cheap feed were stacked against the wall. The household goods were in a pile for Mavis. But in the corner, half hidden under a greasy tarpaulin, was a wooden crate. It wasn't marked with the Cross Sea brand. It was marked with a simple WC. Her hands trembled as she worked the lid open with a crowbar. It wasn't supplies. It was rifles. New gleaming Winchester repeaters. A crate of them. And ammunition. This wasn't just a land grab. Walter Corbett was arming himself for a range war, and Pete Duggan, Liam Callahan's trusted hand, was his gun runner. She dropped the lid, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had the proof. Now she just had to survive telling her husband. Josephine barely slept. She sat in her cold room, the secret ledger in her lap. The image of the rifles burned into her mind. This had escalated beyond theft. Corbett wasn't just trying to bankrupt Liam, he was preparing to fight him, and Liam's own man was arming the enemy. She had to tell him. But how he had already dismissed her, once humiliated her publicly. If she went to him now with a story about Corbett rifles and a grand conspiracy, would he believe her? Or would he think her hysterical? She needed more. She needed the final piece. What was the connection? How did Pete operate so freely? He needed an ally inside the house. Someone who knew Liam's schedules, who knew when the office was empty, who knew the patrol routes of the loyal hands. Her mind instantly went to Mavis Greer. The hatred, the bitterness, the way she guarded Anna's memory like a shrine. It all clicked into place. Mavis wasn't just a bitter housekeeper. She was a saboteur. Josephine thought back. Mavis complained about Pete's muddy boots, yes. But she always seemed to know his schedule. Mavis controlled the kitchen, the center of the ranch's communication. She heard the hands gossip, she fed them, she knew everything. Josephine decided to set a trap. She went to the office early before Liam was even awake. She found the main ranch ledger, the one Liam actually read. She opened to the inventory page she had memorized. It was just as she'd left it. She took a clean piece of paper and with a shaking hand carefully altered her own neat handwriting to mimic Liam's impatient scrawl. At the bottom of the feed column, she added a new entry, Memo J, inspecting South Pasture with Ben, all hands riding, ranch empty. LC. She left the ledger open on his desk, exactly as he often left it. Then she went to the kitchen. Mavis was already there, slamming pots. "Mavis!" Josephine said, her voice breathy with fake panic. "Mr. Callahan, he's furious. He's found a break in the south fence. He's pulling every hand, even the cook, to ride the line. He said he thinks Corbett's men cut the wire." Mavis froze her hand halfway to the flour bin. Her eyes, usually dull with contempt, sharpened. "Every hand he's emptying the ranch. Yes, he seemed terribly angry. He's in the office now, checking the maps. He told me to stay in my room, that it wasn't safe." Mavis's expression was a flicker of something. "Triumph, you do that!" Mavis said, her voice tight. "You go to your room. Stay out of the way. I'll lock the house down." Josephine nodded and fled. But she didn't go to her room. She ran out the back, circled the house, and hid in the dense, overgrown lilac bushes outside the office window. She waited. 10 minutes later, the office door opened. It wasn't Liam. It was Mavis. She looked left, then right, then darted to the desk. She read the ledger. She saw the note Josephine had forged. A thin, cruel smile touched her lips. She turned and hurried out of the office, heading not to the kitchen, but to the small pantry at the back of the house. Josephine moved, creeping along the side of the house until she was crouched beneath the pantry window. She heard Mavis sliding a crate. Then a low whistling sound from outside. Josephine peered over the sill. It was Pete Duggan. He wasn't supposed to be here. He should have been with the other hands. "He's moved," Mavis hissed, slipping a folded piece of paper to him through the cracked window. "He's taking every hand to the south pasture. He found the wire. He's spooked." "He'll be spooked a lot more soon," Pete whispered back, grinning. "Corbett's pleased. This is perfect. The north pasture is wide open. We can move the rest of the special order right onto his land without anyone seeing." "Good," Mavis said, her voice dripping with venom. "And the other matter?" Corbett agrees. "Once he's bankrupt, once he's broken, the house is yours, Mavis. A gift for all your help. And for Anna." "For Anna," Mavis repeated, her voice cracking with a sudden raw grief. "He killed her, Pete. He pushed her to ride that wild stallion just to prove he could tame her. He broke her. He broke my sister. And I will see him broken in the dirt he loves so much. He'll get what's coming to him," Pete said, pocketing the note. "I'll get this to Corbett. He'll move the men tonight." Pete vanished. Mavis closed the window, her shoulders shaking. Josephine sank back against the foundation of the house, her blood ice. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about land. This was about revenge. Mavis Greer, the grey, bitter housekeeper, was the true architect of Liam's destruction. She was Anna's sister. Josephine had never known. The aunt was a lie. This was a vendetta. Mavis had been feeding information to Pete, who fed it to Corbett. She altered the ledgers after Josephine checked them. She covered Pete's tracks. She was the rot at the heart of the Cross Sea, and she had just confirmed the plan. They were moving the rifles, the special order, to the north pasture tonight. Josephine's mind raced. She couldn't wait. She couldn't set another trap. She had to go to Liam, now, with everything. She ran not to the house, but to the corrals. She saw Liam just as she'd expected, working with Ben, completely unaware of the emergency she'd invented. "Mr. Callahan," she yelled, running, skidding to a stop in the mud. Liam looked up, his face hardening into its usual mask of annoyance. "Josephine, I told you I was busy. You have to listen to me." She was out of breath, tears of pure adrenaline, and terror streaming down her face. It's Mavis. It's Mavis and Pete Duggan. They're working for Walter Corbett. Ben stopped his work. Liam's eyes narrowed. I warned you about this, accusing my men. She's not your man. She's Anna's sister. The words hit him like a physical blow. Liam went absolutely still. The colour drained from his face, leaving a grey mottled pallor under his tan. What did you say? Mavis Greer is Anna's sister, and she's been helping Corbett ruin you. She's been fixing the ledgers, helping Pete steal supplies, and feeding him your schedules. They're trying to bankrupt you. She blames you for Anna's death. Liam looked like he'd been shot. He stared past her toward the house, his mind clearly racing back through 5 years of shared silent grief. 5 years of Mavis's loyalty. How do you know? His voice was a strangled whisper. I forged a note in your ledger. I said you were taking all the hands south. She took the bait. She met Pete at the pantry window. I heard everything. They're working for Corbett. They're moving rifles. Rifles, Liam, to the north pasture tonight. Corbett is starting a range war. And Mavis is helping him. Liam's gaze snapped back to her. The grief was gone, replaced by a terrifying cold fire. He didn't question her. He didn't doubt her. He had dismissed her as a city girl, but he recognized the raw, undeniable truth in her eyes. He had been a fool. Ben, Liam said, his voice quiet but carrying across the corral. Boss. Get Sam and Walker. Tell them to bring their rifles. We're not riding south. We're riding north, and we're riding quiet. He turned and strode toward the house, his steps heavy. What about Mavis? Josephine asked, running to keep up. She's mine, Liam said, his voice a low growl. He slammed through the back door and into the kitchen. Mavis was there, kneading bread, her back to the door. Is the south fence mended already, Mr. Callahan? She asked, not turning. There's nothing wrong with the south fence, Mavis. She froze. The kneading stopped. She turned around slowly. Her eyes landed on Liam and then on Josephine, standing just behind him. The colour drained from her face. You, she breathed, staring at Josephine. You killed my sister. Mavis spat her composure, cracking her face, twisting into a mask of pure hatred. You and your pride. You put her on that horse. That was an accident, Mavis. I loved her, Liam said, his voice raw. You broke her. You smothered her. This ranch was her dowry, her life, and you just moved on. You even replaced her. She shrieked, gesturing wildly at Josephine. You brought this nothing, this brought little sparrow into her house. So you decided to destroy it, Josephine said, stepping forward. You helped Corbett. You helped steal from this house. I took what was hers, Mavis screamed. I gave it to a man who would appreciate it. Walter Corbett respected her. He respected me. He'll crush you, Liam, tonight. He's moving his men, his guns. He'll be waiting for you in the south. By morning, your herd will be gone, and your ranch will be indefensible. Liam's face was pale. He's not waiting in the south, Mavis. He's in the north. And we're not riding into his trap. He's riding into mine. Mavis's eyes widened in horror as she realized her mistake. She had been the one to give Pete the false information. But how she looked at Josephine, who was holding the secret ledger. You, Mavis whispered, the realization dawning. The ledgers, the untidy accounts. I'm proficient with figures, Josephine said quietly. Liam stepped forward. Mavis Greer, you are a traitor. You'll be held in the cellar until the marshal can get here. Mavis lunged, not at Liam, but at Josephine, her hands clawed. You little witch. Liam caught her, his arms wrapping around her like steel bands. She fought, kicked and screamed, the years of suppressed rage and grief pouring out of her in a torrent of incoherent words. He lifted her bodily and carried her from the kitchen, his face a mask of stone. Josephine was left alone, shaking the sound of Mavis's screams echoing from the cellar. The first part of the nightmare was over, but the second part, the confrontation in the north pasture, was just beginning. The sun was a bloody smear on the horizon as Liam, Ben, and the two most trusted hands, Sam and Walker, rode out. They were armed for war. Liam had a Winchester in his saddle scabbard and 2 pistols holstered at his hips. His face was unreadable, carved from the same cold granite as the mountains. He had paused only once before leaving. Josephine was waiting on the porch, wringing her hands. He had stopped his horse in front of her. "Lock the doors, Josephine. Bolt them. Don't open them for anyone but me or Ben." "Liam, be careful." It was the first time she had used his given name. He held her gaze for a long, heavy second. He didn't say thank you. He didn't apologize. He simply nodded a short, sharp acknowledgement. Then he turned his horse and with a yell led his men into the gathering dusk. Josephine was left with the terrifying silence of the ranch house. The cellar door was bolted. Mavis was quiet. The rest of the hands, including Pete Duggan, were still in the bunkhouse, oblivious. They thought the action was happening in the south. Josephine, however, couldn't stay put. She felt like a caged animal. She had sent Liam into a fight with rifles. What if Mavis had been wrong about the numbers? What if Corbett had more men? She looked at the stable. Her mare was still there. She couldn't fight, she couldn't shoot, but she couldn't wait. There was one person who could help. She scribbled a frantic note. Corbett, North Pasture, guns, ambush, bring help. J. Callahan. She went back to the bunkhouse, her heart pounding. She knocked. A young hand, a boy of 16, named Willie, opened the door. "Ma'am, Willie," she said, pressing the note and a $10 gold coin into his hand. "I need you to ride to Laramie. Now. Don't use the main road. Cut across the flats. Give this note to Marshal Brody. Only him. Tell him it's life and death for the Cross Sea. Ride like the devil is chasing you." The boy's eyes went wide at the coin and the terror in her voice. He nodded, grabbed a bridle, and was gone. Josephine was alone. She locked the house, but she didn't hide. She went to the office and lit a lamp. She was his wife. She would protect his home. 8 miles north, Liam and his men had left their horses in a ravine. They crawled on their bellies to the crest of a low ridge that overlooked the wide, flat pasture bordering Corbett's new land. The moon was high, casting the valley in silver and black. At first, there was nothing. "Boss," Ben whispered. "You sure the woman was right?" "She was right," Liam said, his voice flat. He leveled his binoculars. "There." A quarter-mile away, a wagon was moving its wheels muffled with burlap. It wasn't the Cross Sea wagon, it was Corbett's, and riding alongside it were 6 men, including Pete Duggan. "That's Pete, damn his hide," Walker muttered. "They're heading for the creek bend," Liam said. "Corbett's land is just beyond it. They're moving the rifles." "6 of 'em, boss," Ben said. "Plus whoever's in the wagon. We're only 4. "We're 4 that know the land," Liam said. "And we're 4 that are on the right side. They'll be noisy thinking we're miles away. We'll be quiet. We're not starting a war, Ben. We're ending one. We're not here to kill them. We're here to capture them. And the guns, that's the proof the Marshal needs." They split up. Ben and Sam circled wide to the east to cut off the retreat to Corbett's land. Liam and Walker moved west to flank the wagon itself. They moved like shadows. The wagon rumbled closer, Pete's laugh carrying on the night air. "Easy money, boys," Pete yelled. "By morning, old man Callahan will be surrounded, and he won't even know how it happened." "Shut up, Duggan!" another voice growled. "Get this cargo unloaded." The wagon stopped. The men dismounted. Just as they pulled back the tarp, revealing the long, dark crates, Liam acted. "Walter Corbett," Liam's voice boomed across the pasture, amplified by the hills. "You're trespassing, and you're thieves!" The men panicked, grabbing for their guns. "We're on my land, Callahan!" A man shouted back, "Corbett." He must have been riding with them. "This is cross-sea land," Liam yelled. "And those are my supplies you've been stealing, including those rifles, Pete." Pete Duggan froze, realizing he'd been found out. He raised his rifle not at Liam, but at the shadows where he thought Liam was, and fired. The shot echoed like a cannon. "No shooting," Liam commanded. "Give up, Corbett, you're surrounded." "You're a liar, Callahan," Corbett screamed. "You're alone. Kill him." Corbett's men opened fire. Bullets whined off the rocks near Liam and Walker. "Ben now!" Liam roared. From the east, Ben and Sam fired not at the men, but at the ground in front of their horses. The animals screamed and scattered, leaving Corbett's men on foot. "We're flanked," one of them yelled. "Hold your ground," Corbett ordered. It was chaos. Gun smoke filled the air. Pete Duggan, seeing his payday vanishing, made a run for the wagon. He grabbed one of the new rifles from the crate and leveled it at the ridge where Liam was pinned down. "This one's for Mavis, you brute," Pete screamed and fired. Walker yelled as a bullet grazed his arm. Liam returned fire not at Pete, but at the wagon wheel. The heavy slug shattered the spoke. The wagon slumped, spilling the crates. "It's over, Corbett," Liam yelled. "My whole crew is on its way from the south." It was a bluff, but a good one. Corbett's men, leaderless and on foot, hesitated. "He's lying. There's only 4 of them," Pete shrieked. He raised his rifle again, taking careful aim at Liam's position. "Boss, look out!" Ben yelled. A new sound cut through the night. A high, thundering drumbeat. Hoofbeats, a lot of them, coming hard from the south. "See," Liam yelled, seizing the moment. "You're done." Corbett's men threw down their guns. "Don't shoot. We give up." Pete Duggan, his face a mask of terror, dropped his rifle and put his hands high in the air. Walter Corbett stood shaking with rage as a dozen armed men thundered into the pasture, but it wasn't Liam's crew. In the name of the territory of Montana, a loud voice bellowed, "Everybody drop your weapons." Marshal Brody flanked by 6 deputies, and the young hand Willie rode into the center of the standoff. The marshal surveyed the scene, Liam and his men on the ridge, Corbett and his disarmed crew, by the broken wagon and the spilled crates of rifles glinting in the moonlight. "Well, Callahan," Brody said, tipping his hat. "Looks like you're having a busy night." "They were stealing my property, Marshal, and trespassing," Liam said, walking down from the ridge, his rifle held loosely. "Is that so, Corbett?" Brody asked, turning to the fuming rancher. "This is a misunderstanding," Corbett began. Marshal Liam interrupted. He pointed to Pete Duggan. "That man, Pete Duggan, has been spying for Corbett, and those crates are full of rifles. I believe you'll find they match the manifest from the army shipment that was lost last month." Brody's eyes went wide. He dismounted and opened a crate. "Winchesters, army issue." He looked at Corbett, his eyes hard. "Mister, your misunderstanding just turned into a federal crime. Gun running, theft, conspiracy." Corbett turned white. "It was Duggan. It was all his idea." "And I suppose," a new voice said, "it was his idea to use Mavis Greer as an accomplice." Everyone turned. Josephine was riding toward them on her mare, her face pale but resolute. She had followed Willie and the marshal. "Josephine," Liam barked, his anger flashing. "I told you to stay in the house and let you have all the fun," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. She looked at Marshal Brody. "Marshal, I am Josephine Callahan. Mavis Greer is locked in my cellar. She is Walter Corbett's main accomplice. She confessed everything. She's been feeding him information for months, all in an attempt to ruin my husband. She did it out of revenge. She's Anna Callahan's sister. The valley fell into a stunned silence. Marshal Brodie stared from Josephine to Liam, and then to the defeated men. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, slowly removing his hat, "it seems you've just solved more crimes in one night than I have all month." He turned to his deputies. "Corbett, Duggan, and the rest of them. Cuff them. We'll pick up the woman at the ranch. This is the biggest conspiracy this territory has seen in a decade." As the deputies rounded up the men, Liam walked slowly over to Josephine. He stood looking up at her, his face a complex mask of anger, shock, and a new emotion she couldn't identify. He had been betrayed by his most trusted housekeeper. He had been blindsided by his greatest rival. His entire ranch, his entire life had been saved. By her, the city girl, the bought wife, the placeholder. He didn't say anything. He just reached up his hand, calloused and stained with gunpowder, and lightly touched her knee. He looked at her as if seeing her for the very first time. And in that one look, Josephine knew the war was truly over. The ride back to the Cross Sea was a long, strange procession. Marshal Brodie and his deputies led the prisoners and the wagon of rifles. Liam, his men, and Josephine rode behind. The silence between her and her husband was no longer the cold, empty space of their first week. It was heavy-charged and vibrating with everything unsaid. Liam kept glancing at her, as if she were a stranger he was trying to place. When they arrived, the sun was just lighting the sky. The deputies loaded a pale, silent Mavis Greer into a wagon. Her eyes met Josephine's one last time, holding only a vast, empty void. Marshal Brodie tipped his hat. "Mr. Callahan, ma'am, you've done this territory a great service." With the rumble of wagons, they were gone. Ben and the other weary hands nodded to Liam and headed for the bunkhouse, leaving Liam and Josephine standing alone in the yard. The house, which had been her prison, now felt different. The ghosts had been exorcised. "You're bleeding," Josephine said, her voice quiet. Liam looked down. A bullet had torn a long, shallow gash on his forearm. He hadn't even noticed. "It's nothing." "It's not a nothing," she said. "Come inside. I'll clean it." He followed her for the first time like he was the visitor. He sat at the kitchen table as she fetched the medical kit. The sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes. She poured whiskey onto a clean cloth, her touch gentle but firm as she cleaned the wound. He hissed, but his eyes never left her face. "You rode after me," he said. "You were outnumbered." She replied, not looking up. "I sent Willie for the marshal." "That was smart." "I'm proficient with figures," she said, a small, sad echo of their earlier conversation. He flinched. "Josie." She stopped the cloth hovering over his arm. He hadn't called her Josephine. I was a fool," he said, his voice raw. "A blind, arrogant fool." "You were grieving," she said softly, starting to bandage the arm. "Grieving." He let out a harsh laugh. "I was hiding. Mavis was right. I did push Anna. I wanted everything. An heir, the biggest ranch, a perfect wife. I pushed her until she broke. When she died, I didn't just lock up her room. I locked up me. I let Mavis turn this house into a tomb because I deserved it." He finally looked up, his blue eyes swimming with 5 years of pain. "And then I dragged you into it. I saw your father's debt, and I saw a solution. A way to have a mistress for the house without having to feel. I bought you. I treated you like a transaction." "It was a transaction," Josephine said, tying off the bandage. "It saved my father. I agreed to it." "You agreed to be my wife." he said, his voice rising. Not my prisoner, not my bookkeeper, not the target of my sister-in-law's hatred. He stood pacing. And you came into this snake pit, and you saw. You saw the theft, the lies. You saw what I refused to see in 5 years. You saved this ranch, Josie. You saved me from myself. Josephine stood, her hands clasped. What now, Liam? He stopped in front of her. Now, he said, I ask you to forgive me. The bargain we made, it's void. Your father is safe. You're free. You don't have to stay here. His words hit her. Free after all this. He was letting her go. A cold, hollow feeling opened in her chest. You want me to leave? She whispered. I don't want you to leave, he said, his voice cracking. God help me, Josie. I want to start over. But I can't hold you to a bargain that was built on my shame. He saw the hurt in her face. Josie, he pleaded. I am so very sorry. He reached out his hand, calloused and stained with gunpowder, and gently cupped her cheek. His thumb stroked her skin. It was the first time he had ever touched her with tenderness. You are, he whispered, the strongest, bravest person I have ever known. And I shamed you. I shamed us both. No, she said, her own tears welling. The town shamed us. Mavis shamed us. We just survived. He looked at her, his eyes tracing her mouth. The most powerful man in the territory was terrified of this one small woman, and that she realized was the most honest thing she had ever seen. She leaned in just a fraction. An invitation. He hesitated, his gaze locked on hers, searching for any sign of refusal. Finding none, he leaned down. His lips, chapped and rough, brushed hers. It was not a kiss of passion, but a clumsy, desperate confession, tasting of gunpowder and 5 years of unspoken grief. Josephine's hands rose to his chest, feeling his heart hammer against her palms as he held her face. The kiss deepened, no longer a question, but an answer. It was an acknowledgement. I see you. In that one transformative moment, all the shame of their transaction and the coldness of their vows dissolved. They were just two people standing in the morning sun, finally seeing each other. He pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. I don't know how to do this, Josie, he whispered, his voice thick. How to be a husband. I don't know how to be a wife, she confessed. But I think we can learn. He let out a shaky breath, almost a laugh, his eyes no longer ice, but warm. The east wing is cold, he said, and Anna's room. It's time to let the sun in. That's a job I have to do alone. But the master bedroom, it's large, and it's warm, and it's been empty for a very long time. It was a simple, hopeful invitation. She looked at this broken, complicated man. He was not the brute she had married, and she was not the victim he had bought. She gave him a small, watery smile. I've heard it's the best room in the house. A slow, genuine smile spread across Liam's face. He took her hand and kissed her palm. Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan, he said. Welcome home, Liam. The rancher's shameful marriage was over. This morning, with a single kiss, something new had just begun. Josephine's courage transformed a shameful marriage into a story of triumph. She saved Liam his ranch and herself by uncovering the dark secrets poisoning the Cross Sea. Their story proves that we should never underestimate a quiet spirit, and that even a cold transaction can be redeemed by truth. A house of shadows finally became a real home. What did you think of the twist that saved the Callahan Ranch? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you loved this story of justice and redemption, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and be sure to subscribe for more stories just like this.